All right. Well, how do you feel about adding the COVID vaccine to your children's routine vaccine schedule? That is what the CDC will vote on this week. That means whether or not they add the COVID vaccine to the things that they vaccinate children for as they, from infancy up, such as polio, diphtheria, DTaP, all of those things, right? These laws are set by the state. So whether the CDC votes for this, it doesn't actually mean you're going to have to do it. But where do the states take their recommendation from? Well, at least in large part, the CDC. So could your child be kept from attending school unless they have a COVID shot because your state goes along with this? Possibly. So let's talk about what's actually happening. Reporters picked up on this scheduled vote in a CDC webinar that was held last week. This was a public webinar with these doctors here. The name of the webinar shows what they were discussing: schools, keeping kids healthy in school with what? Vaccines. So reporters who attended the webinar pointed out this quip from these doctors, this question in the webinar, a question about, is it expected that the COVID vaccine will be added to vaccine for childcare program? And this doctor says, well, what I would say is stay tuned to next week's ACIP meeting that will be discussed about the COVID vaccines appearing on the child, adolescent, and adult schedules. So she said, tune into this ACIP meeting. Well, what is that? ACIP is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. Who are they advising? Oh, government, the people who run our communities, basically. Okay. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices meeting started today. On the agenda today is a discussion about adding the vaccine. Sorry.
Breaking news, they just voted.
Okay. And they voted to or against?
Unanimously. They voted unanimously to add the COVID-19 mRNA shots to the recommended childhood vaccine schedule in the United States.
Okay. So it's no longer a hypothetical.
That's insane. Did they not hear Biden say it was over?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about why they would do this, not just, if you really sit down and ask yourself, why would they do this? Right?
This don't have.
Yeah. Again, your state has to set this in place because the vaccines that are required for public school attendance are set by the state. And whether or not in some states you can use religious exemption, it's different state to state.
There are no comments on the docket site in favor of this, according to Twitter tonight. So if you go to the docket site, which I'm about to in a second here, no comments in favor of them doing this.
What is the docket site?
The public docket site where they put this out publicly ahead of time.
Okay.
So you can weigh in.
Okay. It does seem very strange when you consider that the flu virus is not included in that schedule. We're talking about the routine schedule of polio, DTaP, whooping cough, those types of things. The CDC recommends a flu shot. And in some states, for instance, where my children went in New Jersey, they had to have a flu shot up until kindergarten. And then it was not required. It was recommended only in order to come back from the Christmas break. And in most places, a flu shot is not recommended for most ages. So now they're saying the COVID vaccine should be a part of the regularly scheduled vaccine. Some states may require this. Some states will absolutely not. The Surgeon General of Florida, Joseph Ladapo, said on Tuesday that this will not fly in Florida no matter what the CDC says. He posted this just last night. Regardless of what CDC votes tomorrow on whether COVID-19 vax are added to routine child immunization, nothing changes in Florida. Thanks to Governor Ron DeSantis, COVID mandates are not allowed in Florida, not pushed into schools, and I continue to recommend against them for healthy kids. This is what the same Surgeon General that was punished on Twitter for releasing his own state guidelines that some populations not be vaccinated, particularly those at risk for cardiac events, specifically younger males. He was reinstated on Twitter, but not after a fight over his right to say this. So why would the CDC do this? Besides sort of the normal, they like vaccines excuse. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a lawyer and a member of the Kennedy family. He's the nephew. of the Kennedy brothers, he says that if the CDC does this, it's not an if anymore. When the CDC does this, it gives permanent immunity to the pharmaceutical companies that they would not otherwise have if their emergency use authorization is revoked. He said this on Michaela Peterson's YouTube show, and I'm going to play you a clip. Take a listen.
So they're never going to market a vaccine, allow people access to a vaccine, an approved vaccine, without getting liability protection. Now, the emergency use authorization vaccines have liability protection under the PrEP Act and the CARES Act. So as long as you take an emergency use, you can't sue them. Once they get approved, now you can sue them, unless they can get it recommended for children.
What?
Because all vaccines that are officially recommended for children, get liability protection, even if an adult gets that vaccine. That's why they're going after kids.
Okay, so if that's true, then this bridges a liability gap, because we've talked a lot about the emergency use authorization. If that's revoked, because presumably we cannot justify an emergency forever. COVID hospitalizations and deaths are decreasing. So then the pharma companies would actually have to go through clinical trials and get full approval for these vaccines. And they don't want to do that. So instead...
Well, that's the thing. They already have gone through them and were not approved.
Yes, right. They only ever had emergency use authorization. So if Kennedy is right, then vaccines approved for children then have no liability risk. So what? If these loopholes exist, why do we have regulatory boards at all? Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins brought up this very point on Tucker Carlson just last night.
Amazing story that's been effectively buried. This week, the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is expected to add the COVID-19 vax to the list of required childhood vaccines. If this happens, your children will not be able to attend school without taking the COVID shot. Now, the problem is there's no medical basis for this decision whatsoever. Even the CEO of Moderna has just admitted that most people do not need the booster. And in fact, in this country, it's like 4% of adults have gotten the booster because they know now. We're quoting, "It's going to be similar to the flu," he said. So what is this exactly? Dr. Marty Makary is a man we trust. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He joins us tonight to assess. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on. Is it an overstatement to say there's really no medical justification for this?
Well, there's certainly no clinical data. They've got data from 8 mice on the Omicron vaccine in young people. And the child vaccine story is essentially a story of bypassing clinical data, which is why many of us are asking, why even have an FDA? Why do we even do clinical trials? Right now, we've got pharma saying, hey, we did a study. We're going to give you the top line of the press release. We're going to call the White House, and the White House then calls the FDA and the CDC and tells them to get in line. They bought 170 million doses of this new Omicron vaccine. There has never been a vaccine added to the child immunization schedule without solid clinical evidence that it reduces disease significantly in the community. The COVID vaccine in children will be the first. It will be added with no clinical data. And many of us that are saying, hey, let's see the data, we're basically told, stop asking questions. Dr. Jha, who's the chief COVID advisor at the White House, has said he has seen the data, but it's not public information. What are they hiding? Why can't we see this information? Instead, we're basically seeing this intense paternalism to really just do what we say and stop asking questions. And the CDC's committee that's voting, I mean, that is essentially a kangaroo court. You have to be an official card-carrying vaccine fanatic to be on that committee. If you're not, then basically they're not going to accept people who think that some vaccines are important and others lack the evidence to support broad distribution. Remember, 1 in 5,000 vaccine doses results in a severe adverse event, according to data from overseas, from Germany, because we don't fund that research in the U.S. And in Israel, they took 283 people who got myocarditis from the vaccine. 1 of them died, 2 were in the ICU. So if thousands of people are going to get myocarditis from this indiscriminate vaccination, vaccination in young, healthy people, we're going to see some unintended harm. And my concern is that some schools may blindly accept this. So if the CDC decides to go ahead and put this on the routine vaccine schedule, it'll be up to states. And that's where I think parents have a right to say, let's see some clinical data before we force this as a requirement for school.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is like, you're so understated in your effect, but what you're saying is shocking, I think, to the layman anyway. So I appreciate you're saying it. I'm sure you're taking a lot of heat for it, but we're grateful. Dr. Barney McCary of Johns Hopkins, thanks.
Thanks.
So this would be the first vaccine added to the routine childhood schedule without data or trials, right? Tucker here. Yes.
Another thing that's frustrating is the FDA is all we have on our side. Like, they're supposed to protect us, yet they worked with Pfizer to try to hide data for 75 years from us, but a judge did not allow that to happen. And that's the data that we have that shows, like we were reading that on this channel. We can't do that because we will get trouble, but the FDA was complicit in trying to hide that from us. So why are they not like talking about like that stuff? Like the FDA, the CDC, all working together. They're supposed to work for us. And obviously they are not.
Yeah. Now, Tucker said that only 4% of adults have been boosted. The CDC says that is a much higher statistic. If you take a look at how many adults have received the first booster dose, they're saying that that's up to 49%. If you look at how many adults have had the second booster shot, they're saying 39%. But again, that's for people over the age of 5 at this point, and there are about 330 million people living in the U.S., so not all of them are over 5. But still, that's a declining profit for Big Pharma. They have these shots. They want to give them to you for a profit. And keep in mind, they fully vaccinated 226 million people in the United States with the original vaccine. So only 25 million have had the second booster. So if you're one of the bean counters for Big Pharma, you'd be sad about that too. So to make up for the revenue, you could require it of school-age children or just call it the flu shot, right? Like the CEO of Moderna said that he would do. Take a look.
Is the COVID vaccine going to become that? Is it going to be an annual COVID booster for a very long time to come, or maybe for the rest of our lives? And how do you merge that with the fact that there's already low uptake of this new variant booster?
So I think it's interesting. The uptake is actually stronger than seasonal flu from the data I've seen recently. So we have to see toward the end of the season, what does it look like? It's the first time we're going to be more in an endemic setting than a pandemic setting. So I think we'll be smarter in a month or two. But the current data show that it's a better uptake than seasonal flu shot. And I think it's going to be like the flu, which is, again, if you're 25-year-old, do you need an annual booster every year if you're healthy? You might want it to protect other people. You might want it because you don't want to get sick and miss work or miss vacation or so on. But I think it's going to be very similar to flu, where the key is going to be people at high risk, people above 50 years of age, people with comorbidity, people with cancer and other conditions, transplant. And that's really important to think about. And if you look at it around the world, that is 1.5 billion people. So it's a lot of people that are going to need an annual booster, and people that are younger are going to have to decide for themselves what they want to do. I mean, the example I always use is myself. I've been taking a flu shot for the last 20 years. I just turned 50. So in my 30s, in my 40s, I took an annual flu shot. Is it because I was worried of being hospitalized? Of course not. I just didn't want to be sick. I wanted to be able to work. And I believe that the best thing we can all do in medicine is prevention. And vaccine is one of the most amazing healthcare tools we all have. And so Absolutely. I took a vaccine against flu so I didn't get sick. And so I could, have a normal life and work and take my vacation and be with my friends and family.
Something we all want to be able to do, especially during the holidays.
And I used to have hair. I used to, back many years ago before I started taking all of these vaccines, I had tons of hair and I had furniture. Now I don't have hair or furniture. All of my furniture gone.
All right. Well, we were presenting this story to you as a hypothetical that the CDC may vote for this. Turns out they did. So, okay, we'll see what happens in your state. If you feel any which way about it, you should contact your state educational board. I think you should make it known however you feel about this for your own children.
I see a lot of people saying this is the last year they're putting their kids in public school. They're putting their kids in school. They're going to do homeschooling as a result of this.
I sure wouldn't.
Again, your state has to instate it. Just because the CDC said it doesn't mean it will happen in your own community.
I was wondering if at some point, like if a state doesn't do it, if they lose some kind of federal funding, like if they could do that kind of thing. Say, hey, we're going to implement this. If you don't implement it, you're not going to get funding for this.
Yes, 100% they would do that through the Department of Education. Absolutely, they would do that. They do that all the time. And so, yes, they would do that. I'm not being cynical about it, and I'm not being conspiratorial. They would absolutely do that. So it depends on what administration is in Washington, D.C., of course, right? Go ahead, Philip.
I was just going to say, because I'm trying to think back to the last election, and I don't remember who I voted for to be on the CDC board. I can't remember voting for anybody.
Yeah.
You don't?
Those unelected people that are part of like the biopharmaceutical complex. You didn't vote for those people to determine literally the future. Yeah. I don't recall voting for those people either. It wasn't on my ballot.
No, and Clayton and I printed our absentee ballots just today, and I was like, okay, what's really here? But no one is from the CDC is on that. There's no CDC portion.
The coroner can vote for that's the best part. I can vote for the guy that looks at the people who die afterwards. I can look at those guys who come and examine bodies.
Yeah, you can vote for that.
Vote for that guy.
All right.
Do you ever notice there's no one ever running against a coroner? The coroner always runs like unopposed. There's always just like one person that's like, there's never like I would love to see a debate between coroners.
Or could you even run as like a newbie? Like, I'm an outsider.
Right.
I'm going to drain the swamp.
This coroner, he's been doing the same thing for so many years with that embalming fluid. We're gonna shake things up a little bit.
Yeah.
Term limits on the coroner, the county coroner. I can't believe that you have to vote that guy.
You need to get big corporation out of
the coroner's office. They've been ruining things for all of us in the coroner's office.
But the people who they work with, they don't complain.
Right. They're just a bunch of stiffs. All right, we got more news to get to.
Industrial furniture. I was thinking that industrial funeral directors. So now I just got thrown off. Like, complex, but
right. The coroner pharmaceutical.
The more
complex.
morbid industrial complex. Okay.
Big funeral. Got to get big funeral out of it.
Yeah, I do like that.
Big funeral. Big funeral's always getting involved.